The one that made us believe in ride-or-die romance has officially cracked like a glass of cheap champagne at a celebrity after-party. We're talking about none other than Tiny and T.I, the so-called royal couple of Atlanta's hip-hop scene. For years, they've given fans a front-row seat to their roller coaster relationship, from reality TV cameras to red carpet reconciliations. But baby, behind all those smiles and matching outfits, something dark has been brewing. And now, sources say that the truth behind their latest so-called secret wedding might just be the scandal that ends it all. Now, here's the twist. The wedding wasn't the problem. The truth behind it was. Because according to the whispers coming out of Atlanta's inner circle, this wasn't a celebration of love. It was a performance, a carefully staged illusion, a power move so calculated it could make a chess grandmaster blush. So today we're pulling back the curtain and breaking down exactly what went down, what's being said, and why this private ceremony may have been more about contracts than commitment. Let's start with the fairy tale, or at least what was left of it. For years, T.I and Tiny have been painted as hip-hop's Bonnie and Clyde. Through thick and thin, prison sentences, cheating scandals, and public embarrassment, Tiny was always there. She stood by him through the kind of situations that would have sent most people running for the hills. But over time, even the strongest loyalty starts to look more like exhaustion, and it seems Tiny finally hit her breaking point. See, this wasn't some last-minute Vegas elopement or a romantic vow renewal out of the blue. Sources close to the couple say that this so-called secret wedding was nothing more than a business strategy, a smokescreen. It was designed not to renew their love, but to protect something far more valuable, the brand. Because let's be real, in this industry, the image of love can be more profitable than love itself. And from what's being said, T.I wasn't ready to lose that image. Not after everything he's built on the back of being the family man, the reformed husband, and the devoted father. The optics of that were priceless. But they were also crumbling. Now, here's where things start to get real messy. Multiple insiders claim that just before this so-called secret wedding, Tiny had made the decision to finally walk away. Papers were reportedly drawn up, lawyers were in motion, and she was ready to reclaim her peace. But then, as the story goes, T.I made one last move, a move that changed everything. This new wedding wasn't just about saving face. It was allegedly about control. It was about locking down what he feared losing. Not just Tiny, but the shared assets, the business ties, and the public narrative that kept him relevant. Remember, this is a man who has weathered scandal after scandal, from infidelity to those controversial interviews that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The one thing that kept him tethered to public sympathy was Tiny. Without her, his redemption arc evaporates. So, according to people close to the situation, T.I and his team orchestrated a private ceremony, complete with designer gowns, floral arrangements, and an exclusive guest list that included a suspicious number of lawyers disguised as event staff. The setup was flawless, the ambiance was luxurious, but behind the scenes, it was more like a boardroom than a ballroom. And here's the kicker. The ceremony wasn't even legally binding. That's right. Word on the street is this entire event was staged, a performance for the cameras, a PR production meant to project unity, while in reality, the relationship was falling apart faster than a rented wig in the rain. According to one anonymous source, and I quote, "This wasn't about starting over. It was about locking things down before she walked away." End quote. Let that sink in for a second, because if that's true, what we're looking at isn't a love story. It's a business merger gone bad. This isn't the first time we've seen celebrities use their relationships as branding tools. From staged engagements to conveniently timed breakups, Hollywood and the music industry thrive on illusion. But for Tiny and T.I, this illusion might have gone too far. Now, to understand just how deep this runs, we need to rewind a little. Let's talk about the pattern, because T.I has always been a master of narrative control. Remember the infamous Hyman Gate interview, the one that broke the internet and had everyone side-eyeing him for his comments about his daughter? That wasn't just a slip-up. That was a glimpse into a man obsessed with control over his image, his family, and apparently his wife. After that scandal, T.I worked overtime to fix his image. He leaned heavily into the role of family man, doing interviews about growth, healing, and redemption. Tiny, of course, played her part, showing up by his side, smiling through the tension, acting as the loyal wife who forgave and moved forward. But behind the scenes, the cracks were deepening. Every apology came with conditions. Every public gesture came with private consequences.
Tiny, meanwhile, had been finding her own independence. From her music ventures to her entrepreneurial projects, she was standing on her own 2 feet. And that shift, that subtle reclaiming of power, didn't sit well with T.I. Fast forward to this so-called wedding, and suddenly everything makes sense. The exclusive guest list, full of people who had something to gain or protect. The officiant, not a pastor or family friend, but reportedly a lawyer with ties to T.I.'s management. Even the flower girl, who was allegedly Tiny's niece, had to sign an NDA before tossing petals. Yes, you heard that right. And then there's the ring, that massive diamond Tiny was seen wearing afterward, flashing in photos and videos that conveniently found their way online. But according to one jeweler, the bill for that ring hasn't even been paid in full, which raises a bigger question. If the ceremony was fake, were the promises fake too? This whole event seemed like a public relations move dressed up as romance. A way to say, look, we're back, love conquers all, while quietly handling business in the background. But here's the problem. Someone inside that event was recording. And that recording, allegedly it caught everything. We're talking whispered arguments, tense silences, and even an explosive moment where Tiny reportedly threw her bouquet, not to the bridesmaids, but directly at T.I himself. According to insiders, the tension was thick enough to cut with a diamond cutter. Now here's where things get even spicier. That footage is rumored to be in the hands of a gossip outlet, one that rhymes suspiciously with Shade Room. If those clips ever go public, they could expose not just the truth about the wedding, but also the business dealings, the manipulation, and the emotional turmoil that's been hidden for years. And let's be honest, this wouldn't be the first time a celebrity couple's private footage leaked and changed everything. But for a couple like T.I and Tiny, whose entire brand is built on family, unity, and resilience, this could be the final blow. But loyalty, as beautiful as it sounds, can sometimes become the most dangerous drug. When you've built a relationship on constant forgiveness, it's easy to lose yourself trying to keep the peace. Tiny was that peace for a long time. She played the dutiful wife, the loyal queen standing beside her king, even when he didn't deserve the crown. But according to recent whispers, that loyalty has limits, and sources say Tiny finally reached hers. So here's where the story takes a wild left turn. The couple allegedly held a private, intimate ceremony not too long ago. No flashing media coverage, no leaks, just close family and a select few from the industry. Fans thought it was a quiet way of renewing their vows, or maybe starting fresh after a rocky few years. But insiders claim that behind the scenes, it wasn't nearly as romantic as it looked. Because that wedding, the one the blogs are now scrambling to get photos of, might not have even been real. That's right. Multiple sources are now saying the entire event was staged. The flowers, the music, the designer gown, all part of a grand production. It wasn't a celebration of love, it was a public relations strategy. And not Tiny's strategy,
T.I.'s. Allegedly, just before this so-called wedding took place, Tiny had already made the decision to walk away. Papers were drawn, signatures were ready, and the split was about to be finalized. But then, like magic, a new agreement appeared, one that changed everything. Now people close to the situation are saying that this wasn't your typical prenup. This was more like a trap. Tiny reportedly thought she was signing off on final details, but what she got instead was a new contract designed to tighten T.I.'s control over their shared assets, businesses, and public image. Think about it. The timing, the secrecy, the perfectly polished images released afterward. It all fits. What fans saw as a surprise reunion might have been the ultimate PR move to maintain the illusion of family stability. Let's talk about the guest list for a second, because the people who were there say the whole event had a weird vibe. Yes, there were family members, but there were also a lot of event staff who didn't exactly act like wedding planners. Several of them, according to one guest, were quietly slipping into side rooms to make phone calls and pass around paperwork. One even mentioned seeing laptops open during the ceremony, not to DJ or handle music, but to review contracts. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Reports claim that the officiant wasn't a pastor or close friend. He was allegedly a family lawyer, someone who has worked with T.I.'s management team before, which, let's be real, is not how you'd expect a romantic wedding to go down. Even the flower girl, a young relative from Tiny's side, was reportedly made to sign a non-disclosure agreement before walking down the aisle. If that doesn't scream something's off, I don't know what does. To top it off, some sources say this entire wedding wasn't legally binding at all, meaning it might have been a symbolic ceremony for show, not an actual marriage recognized by law. One insider said, and I quote, "This wasn't about starting over. It was about locking things down before she walked away." If you've followed T.I.'s career, you've seen the pattern. Every time he's caught up in controversy, whether it's a cheating scandal, an arrest, or that uncomfortable parenting interview that had everyone talking, he somehow manages to flip the narrative. He goes from reckless rapper to devoted family man overnight. And every time, Tiny's the one standing next to him, helping rebuild that image. But after years of standing by his side, she finally started building her own. Tiny began focusing more on her businesses, mentoring younger artists, and stepping back into her music. And sources say that's when the tension really started. Because the truth is, T.I. didn't just love having Tiny as his wife, he needed her. Not emotionally, but professionally. Without her, that whole family man image, the one that helped him land brand deals, TV projects, and speaking gigs, falls apart. So when Tiny started pulling away, he did what controlling men often do. He created a new narrative. The secret wedding became his redemption arc, his chance to say, look, we're still solid, we're still in love. But behind the scenes, the cracks were showing, and Tiny wasn't pretending anymore. Now, here's the part that's sending the internet into chaos. Someone from inside that wedding, someone who had access to everything, apparently recorded it all. Every awkward moment, every fake smile, every whispered argument between T.I. and Tiny about money, property, and contracts. And according to several blog reports, that footage is now in the hands of a major gossip site, one that rhymes suspiciously with shade resume. What's allegedly on that video? Tiny walking out mid-toast, throwing her bouquet straight at T.I. before storming off, lawyers whispering in corners, guests looking uncomfortable as the tension filled the room. And if that footage ever sees the light of day, it could completely destroy T.I.'s already fragile public image. It would expose the entire performance for what it really was, a business deal wrapped in a love story. Since the story started circulating, social media has been on fire. Fans are divided. Some are blaming T.I. for manipulation and control, while others are accusing Tiny of playing along for too long. But the one thing most people agree on is this. If the rumors are true, then this marriage, or whatever's left of it, is over in everything but name. Tiny's reportedly been distancing herself from the brand they built together, quietly separating her finances and removing certain people from her inner circle. And industry insiders claim her team has been reviewing contracts, freezing shared accounts, and making sure T.I can't access business ventures that were meant to be hers. And that's not all. There's talk that she's already been approached to tell her side of the story. Whether that's through a documentary, a sit-down interview, or even her own reality project remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure, she's not going to stay silent forever. T.I has always been a master of reinvention. Every time the public starts to turn on him, he finds a way to remind us of his hustle, his wisdom, or his family man persona. But the truth is, that image only works if the family plays along. Without Tiny, that illusion crumbles. And when the illusion fades, all that's left is a man who's been hiding behind it for years. What makes the situation even sadder is how familiar it feels. We've seen this story before. Powerful men using relationships as branding tools, women standing by them out of love and loyalty, only to realize that loyalty was never returned. Tiny might have loved T.I once, deeply and genuinely, but at some point love stopped being the reason to stay and started being the reason to leave. Now, let's talk about image, because image has always been T.I.'s currency. He's built an empire around the idea of the reformed hustler, the man who made mistakes but learned from them, the patriarch who preaches growth and leadership. But without Tiny by his side, that narrative starts to fall apart. Tiny has always been the grounding force, the emotional backbone that made that brand believable. She's the reason fans saw hope in their chaos. She turned pain into poise and humiliation into hustle. And when a woman like that finally decides she's done, it's never sudden. It's the result of years of endurance and disappointment quietly piling up until she's too tired to keep pretending. So when Tiny walked into that ceremony, maybe it wasn't with joy or excitement. Maybe it was with resignation, one final act in a story she didn't write. And the saddest part, millions of fans were clapping for something that may have been nothing more than a beautifully staged illusion.